In describing the land of promise to which he was going to bring Israel, God uses language of abundance. He talks about it as a rich and a beautiful land with abundant resources. When Jacob sent his sons to Egypt for the second time to visit Pharaoh, he had them take some of the choice products of the land, it says. Pistachios, almonds, figs, grapes are mentioned in other places as well. We know the story of the spies when they're going into the promised land and how some of them brought back a bunch of grapes so large it took two of them to carry it between them. However, the phrase that's probably the most memorable when speaking about this richness of the land of Canaan is a phrase that is probably running through your heads right now. A land flowing with milk and honey. I could have stopped halfway through that and you all would have finished it for me, I'm sure. A land flowing with milk and honey. Turn to Exodus 3, verse 8. Exodus 3, verse 8. We will start there. God is talking about what he's going to do with the children of Israel, who were at that time slaves in Egypt. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Now, there's so much symbolism in that one verse. We could spend a lot of time just with that, but we're going to focus on the honey bit. And the word translated honey in most of the Hebrew Bible is the word dvash, D-V-A-S-H, or D-E-V-A-S-H, depending on how you wish to spell it. Dvash. And it's a little bit unclear exactly what this word means based upon its own etymology, so we have to look at how it's used. It's translated honey most of the time in the Hebrew Bible, or I should say most of the time the word honey appears in the Hebrew Bible, the word dvash is used. In Arabic, a similar word exists, and that word is dibs. In ancient Assyrian, it's dipshu, and in the ancient Maltese language, it's disby, which is the color yellow. So there's obviously a connection there between that word and honey because of the coloring. And Exodus 3, the verse we read just above, shows the use of that word dvash, the land flowing with milk and honey. There is another word, however, in Hebrew that is also translated honey, and that is the word nophet, N-O-P-H-E-T, nophet. We find this word in Proverbs, so let's look there. Proverbs 24, verse 13. Proverbs 24, verse 13. One of the Proverbs of Solomon, where he's advising his potential son to act in certain ways, how to gain wisdom. We all are familiar with the Proverbs, and he says, "Eat honey, my son, for it is good. Honey from the comb is sweet to your taste." This word is also used in Psalm 19:10, if you want to note that down. I won't read it. "Eat honey, my son, for it is good. Honey from the comb, for it is sweet to your taste." That phrase, honey from the comb, in Hebrew is one word, nophet. So it's sort of a repetition. The first word in that phrase, the first time the word honey appears in that proverb, eat honey, it's the word dvash. And then he repeats himself, eat honey from the comb. So we understand that he's talking about the same subject. He's using different words to talk about it. Other translations say honey that drips from the comb, or the drippings from the comb. So you get that idea that honey's, there's so much of it, it's just dripping down and you can pick it up and you can eat it. So these words are used interchangeably and rather loosely, but nophet is only used for bee honey, and it's almost always used in a wild context. If we look at 1 Samuel 14, verses 25 through 27, this is a story of Saul fighting against one of the enemies, and he is on the verge of victory, and he doesn't want the army to stop fighting, so he issues a command that anybody who stops to eat is going to be put to death. And unfortunately for him, his son Jonathan is leading one of the cohorts of troops, and they're running through the woods chasing the enemy, and they come across some honey. And you know the story, Jonathan reaches out and grabs some of the honey and eats it, and they go on, and that story, we don't need to go into the rest of the story, but it's interesting because this is obviously wild honey from bees, because you don't find anything else sweet sort of lying on the ground in the forest. And it was dripping onto the ground, there was so much of it. So he reached out his staff, he ate some, and he went on to victory. So that word also is dvash, and we can see that it applies to honey. So there's no doubt that this word applies to substances. Let's try that again. This word is talking about substances that we harvest from bees, the word davash. But it also has a broader usage. Davash probably means honey about the same way Coke means any sort of brown fizzy drink, or Velcro can mean any sort of hook and eye type closure. Or if you're English, you do the hoovering, means you vacuum the floor regardless of the make of the machine that you're actually doing it with. So davash is honey, or any other sticky and usually sweet substance. So what we would call syrup, for example. And sweetness is a luxury. So a land flowing with it is a beautiful metaphor for abundance and prosperity. Now, for many years, it was thought that the honey most often referred to was date honey. How many of you have heard of date honey before? Yeah, some of you have probably tried it, especially those who lived in the Middle East. Yes, it's delicious. It's a syrup made from dates. We see this in Deuteronomy 8, verse 8. So let's take a look there. Deuteronomy 8, verse 8. Again, talking about the richness of the land, a land with wheat and barley, vines and fig trees, pomegranates, olive oil, and dvash, honey. And in this case, probably referring to date honey, because all the other elements in this verse are agricultural products that you grow, so trees and things like that. So many scholars believe this is probably referring to date honey. Now, date palms grow in abundance, particularly in the Jordan Valley near Jericho. They are very useful for many things. You can make roofing tiles out of them, out of the fronds. They make roof beams out of them, shingles, fencing. In fact, I have a walking stick here made from the rib of a date palm frond. And if you want to come see it later, you can. It's very lightweight. It's very strong. It's very stiff. And this was part of a fence that was actually built in Israel down in one of the, not quite the Jordan Valley, but down in that general area. And these were stuck in the ground and wire was strung in between them. So it's a fairly stiff type of material. And it's very tough and it lasts a very long time. Anyway, oops. You can also make wine barrels from them. And ironically, beehives were made out of date palms as well. Dates themselves are sweet. They last virtually forever. They are nutritious, and they were basically the Bronze Age equivalent of trail mix, or MREs. If you were going on a long trip, you always took a big bag of dates with you. Those caravans across the Sahara Desert, even to this day, frequently have large bags of dates with them because you can always eat them. And you can even turn the seeds into charcoal. I've seen pottery kilns that were stuffed with date pits that were being used as charcoal to fire the pottery. Since the reference in the Bible that can be connected with bees and honey seem to be references about wild honey, Jonathan, an example, Samson's another example where he gets the honey out of the lion carcass, it was thought by most scholars that davash, this word we've been talking about, most frequently refers to this date honey or syrup. However, all of that changed in 2007 with a unique discovery at the site of the city of Tel Rehov. Tel Rehov is a city with a long history. It's located in the Jordan Valley, not far from Bet Shan, and it's mentioned in the Bible in Joshua 21, if you want to look it up later, as part of the territory given to the tribe of Asher. And in 2007, while excavating the city under the archaeologist Amichai Mazar, they discovered the world's oldest apiary. Now, if you don't know what an apiary is, it's a bunch of beehives all put together. What they found was an unfired clay tube. It's about this big around and about that long. And then they found another one. It has a lid on one end and a small hole in the other end. And then they found another one. And within a very short period of time, they found over 100 of these clay tubes that had been stacked one upon each other, about set on a wall and about this high, about a meter or so off the ground. 3 or 4 of them stacked on top of each other. They found several rows of this. This was a very large building, or very large space anyway, filled with these tubes. And they puzzled over them. What are these tubes? Why weren't they baked? Why aren't they fired? Why aren't they hardened in clay? Started looking inside them, and they started finding interesting things, primarily pieces of honeycomb and dead bee parts. So they were assured, as soon as they started turning those up, that these were beehives. This was indeed a commercial-sized bee farm built in the middle of the city. It was destroyed somewhere in the 9th or 10th century BC, so roughly about the time of Solomon, this bee farm was here in the middle of the city. The bee pieces were dated using carbon-14 dating. That's how we get the dating for this. And not only were these beehives, but a genetic analysis of the dead bees determined that they're not native Syrian bees, but rather they were imported from Anatolia. So people were raising bees, and not just raising bees, 100+ hives in this town. It was sophisticated enough and profitable enough to warrant the importation of bees who were less aggressive and more productive than the local variety of bees. The hive complex was destroyed by fire sometime in the 9th century, most likely. Interestingly, it was the only part of the city destroyed at that time. So there are two theories as to why this was destroyed. There is some indication that there was earthquake damage at the same time. So it may be that whatever this building was not as sturdy as the others, and it collapsed and caught on fire. And that was the cause of the burning of the complex, because the entire complex was burnt to the ground, basically. Another possibility, however, is that the residents just got fed up with having all the bees around, and they torched the place, because this is in the middle of a city, and the city had a population in the low thousands. But if you've got 100 beehives right next door, that would probably kind of get annoying and probably breaks all the zoning rules. Why was it there? Well, there are two important products that were produced by bees. One is honey, and the other is wax. We often overlook the second one, but it was an important industrial product because you used it for casting bronze, gold, and silver. You'd make whatever object you wanted out of wax, you'd bury it in sand, and then you pour the hot metal on top of that, and it would melt the wax, and the hot metal would take the place of its shape. It's called hot wax casting. At roughly the same time, in southern Canaan, in the land of Edom, and also in southern Judah, there was also a boom in copper mining. So these two industries may be connected. You may have needed all this wax because you've got all this copper you're bringing in and making bronze and other objects out of. So either way, this was industrial scale production of honey, far beyond the needs of the few thousand people who lived there. It was abundance. It was an abundance of honey. It was flowing. And I find this fact comforting. Even though it comes from several hundred years after the Exodus, God truly brought his people into an abundant land. Where is he bringing you? Where is he bringing I? Well, ultimately, into the kingdom in its fullest manifestation, a time when the entire earth will be flowing with milk and honey. What about between now and then? Has God brought you anywhere? I ask myself that question frequently. Not because I don't know the answer, but because I want to remind myself of the answer. I want to look around and see. Sometimes the Lord takes us through a desert, that's true, but he always brings us closer to a greater goal. Much of the time when we are in the desert, of course, it's our own doing. We take ourselves there. But the Lord has brought us out many times before. And he's brought us to this congregation. Is it flowing with milk and honey? Well, today at least, the honey part, it will be, because I have brought some date honey and some bee honey, and we'll have it on the back, and you can dip some apples into it, and you can taste and see which one you wish or you prefer. But both of them are very sweet. Spiritually speaking, through the metaphor of the 40 years in the wilderness, God promises to bring his people into an abundant spiritual place as well. Do you believe him? Are we cognizant of this promise? Or do we want to burn it down because there are a few bees buzzing around? God brings his people into a good land, a wide land, a spiritual resting place of abundance. How sweet it is. Let's not wait 2,800 years to dig it up and prove it.